Hello, Gary Stearman with another Prophecy in the News daily update for Monday, July 5th of the year 2010. And I ran across something the other day that was so striking to me that I wanted to read it to you. It is a newspaper column originally written in Spain by a very well-known Spanish journalist. She's a woman by the name of Pilar Rahola. And by the way, she's been active in the government of Spain as a very, very strong leftist. To say leftist is to say communist in Spain. There's a very strong communist presence there. And Pierre Rahola is a very, very well-known journalist who writes in a number of daily papers. Her columns appear not only in Spain, but also in Latin America. And she wrote this, and again, I want to repeat that she is a leftist journalist. One could say hard left, even communist, but she says this, and I'm going to quote her from this point on. Quote, "Why don't we see demonstrations against Islamic dictatorships in London, Paris, and Barcelona? Or demonstrations against the Burmese dictatorship? Why aren't there demonstrations against the enslavement of millions of women who live without any legal protection? Why aren't there demonstrations against the use of children as human bombs where there is conflict with Islam? Why has there been no leadership in support of the victims of Islamic dictatorship in Sudan? Why is there never any outrage against the acts of terrorism committed against Israel? Why is there no outcry by the European left against Islamic fanaticism? Why don't they defend Israel's right to exist? Why confuse support of the Palestinian cause with the defense of Palestinian terrorism? And finally, the million-dollar question, why is the left in Europe and around the world obsessed with the two most solid democracies, the United States and Israel, and not with the worst dictatorships on the planet? The two most solid democracies which have suffered the bloodiest attacks of terrorism, and the left doesn't care. And then to the concept of freedom, she writes, in every pro-Palestinian European forum, I hear the left yelling with fervor, we want freedom for the people. She says, not true. They are never concerned with the freedom for the people of Syria or Yemen or Iran or Sudan or other such nations, and they're never preoccupied when Hamas destroys freedom for the Palestinians. They are only concerned with using the concept of Palestinian freedom as a weapon against Israeli freedom. The resulting consequence of these ideological pathologies is the manipulation of the press. The international press does major damage when reporting on the question of the Israeli-Palestinian issue. On this topic, they don't inform, they propagandize. When reporting about Israel, the majority of journalists forget the reporter code of ethics. And so any Israel act of self-defense becomes a massacre. Any confrontation, genocide. So many stupid things have been written about Israel, she says, that there aren't any accusations left to level against her. And then she goes on. And again, this is a leftist Spanish journalist. I call her a communist, if you will, writing in a very important Spanish newspaper. And she says, at the same time, this press never discusses Syrian and Iranian interference in propagating violence against Israel, the indoctrination of children, the corruption of the Palestinians. And when reporting about victims, every Palestinian casualty is reported as tragedy, and every Israeli victim is camouflaged, hidden, or reported about with disdain. It sounds familiar to me, but coming from a leftist journalist, this is truly amazing. It gets better. And she says, and let me add on the topic of the Spanish left, many are the examples that illustrate the anti-Americanism, the anti-Israeli sentiments that define the Spanish left. For example, one of the leftist parties in Spain has just expelled one of its members for creating a pro-Israel website. I quote from the expulsion document, quote, our friends are the people of Iran, Libya, Venezuela, oppressed by imperialism, and not a Nazi state like Israel, end quote. And then she goes on in another example. The socialist mayor of Campozuelos changed Shoah Day, that is Holocaust Day, commemorating the victims of the Holocaust, with Palestinian Nakba Day, which mourns the establishment of the State of Israel, thus showing the contempt for the 6 million European Jews murdered in the Holocaust. Then she says, in my native city of Barcelona, the city council decided to commemorate the 60th anniversary of the creation of the State of Israel by having a week of solidarity with the Palestinian people. Do you get that? That's the way they celebrated Israel's 60th anniversary, by having solidarity with the Palestinian people. Thus, they invited Layla Khaled, a noted terrorist from the 70s and current leader for the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, a terrorist organization so described by the European Union, which promotes the use of bombs against Israel. She then draws a conclusion. This politically correct way of thinking has even polluted the speeches of President Zapatero, that's Spain's president. His foreign policy falls within the lunatic left, and on issues of the Middle East, he is unequivocally pro-Arab. I can assure you that in private, Zapatero places on Israel the blame for the conflict in the Middle East. And the policies of Foreign Minister Moratinos reflect this. She says the fact that Zapatero chose to wear a kafia in the midst of the Lebanon conflict is no coincidence. It's a symbol. You know, the kafia, the traditional headdress of the Arabs, worn by Spanish President Zapatero to show that he was in unity with the Palestinians. She writes, Spain has suffered the worst terrorist attack in Europe, and it is in the crosshairs of every Islamic terrorist organization. As I wrote before, they kill us with cell phones hooked to satellites connected to the Middle Ages. And yet, the Spanish left is the most anti-Israeli in the world. And then it says it is anti-Israeli because of solidarity. She writes, this is the madness I want to denounce. Now listen to her closing words. I am not Jewish, she says. Ideologically, I am left. By profession, a journalist. Why am I not anti-Israeli like my colleagues? Because as a non-Jew, I have the historical responsibility to fight against Jewish hatred and currently against the hatred for their historic homeland, Israel. To fight against anti-Semitism is not the duty of the Jews, it is the duty of non-Jews. As a journalist, it is my duty to search for the truth beyond prejudice, lies, and manipulations. The truth about Israel is not told. As a person from the left who loves progress, I am obligated to defend liberty, culture, civic education for children, coexistence, and the laws that the tablets of the covenant made into universal principles. Principles that Islamic fundamentalism systematically destroys. This is to say that as a non-Jew, journalist, and lefty, she calls herself, I have a triple moral duty with Israel, because if Israel is destroyed, liberty, modernity, and culture will be destroyed too. The struggle of Israel, even if the world doesn't want to accept it, is the struggle of the world. This from a leftist, communist Spanish journalist by the name of Pilar Rahola. This woman is brilliant. Through the fog of propaganda, she sees the truth. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem, as we do. Have a great day in the Lord, and keep looking up.